Delaney slid the folder across our kitchen table and kept her smile pinned in place. "Just routine, Vance," she said, tapping the signature line. "We can swing by a notary after lunch." The way she said notary, too casual, too rehearsed, made my stomach tighten. "My name is Vance Hollis. I was 37 then, living in Charleston, South Carolina, where everybody knew my last name before they bothered with my first. I ran the day-to-day for our family office, the dull side of old money. Statements, trusts, taxes, and keeping messes away from my father's development company. I wasn't on billboards. I was the guy who made sure the billboards didn't turn into lawsuits. Delaney was 34 and looked like she'd been built for this town. Pretty smile, quick laugh, perfect handshake. She remembered people's kids' names and asked about their allergies like she cared. My parents ate it up. My dad, Clifton Hollis, was 64 and had his name on half the skyline. When he liked you, doors opened. When he didn't, you disappeared. His company had a small advisory board, more like an investor and governance committee, where real decisions got blessed before anybody announced them. My mom, Eileen, was 62 and lived in the charity world. She'd been cautious with Delaney at first, then warmed up hard once Delaney started showing up early, staying late, and carrying trays like she was born to host. Quick note, before listening, share which city or country you're watching from. And let's continue. Delaney worked as a director of partnerships at another developer. At dinner, she talked strategy and relationships and the board, like it was normal small talk, and my father nodded like he was proud. From the outside, our marriage looked clean. A little over 4 years in, holidays at my parents' place, the right photos at the right events, a couple nice trips, and Delaney always looking like she belonged. I had 3 close friends I trusted more than most family. Rafe Larkin was a chef who couldn't sit still. Tobin Crane did PR and lived on emergencies. Jed Mercer coached debate and noticed everything without acting impressed. That fall, we locked in a New Orleans trip we talked about forever. Food, music, long walks, and no Charleston politics. We booked it 8 months ahead like it was a promise we couldn't break. Looking back, the warning signs were there in the small spaces. Delaney asked about our structures like she was studying for a test. She wanted to know who sat where at my father's table, who spoke first, who signed last. She didn't ask what I wanted. She asked what made sense. And those routine documents kept appearing. Small authorizations, she said, for partnerships work. Always with that notary mention, like she was trying to catch me on autopilot. I stalled every time. That day I closed the folder, set it on the counter, and walked it into my office without signing a single thing at all. 8 months after that, I stopped thinking about those unsigned papers long enough to pack a carry-on and meet my guys at the airport. The New Orleans trip finally happened, and for the first day or two it felt like our real lives had gone quiet. We hit a couple old spots like we still belonged there, ate too much, and laughed like we were 22 again. Rafe talked about knives and sauces like everything was a competition. Tobin kept checking his phone like it owed him money, and Jed watched people the way he always did, quiet and sharp. I told myself this was the reset I needed, and I kept moving so I wouldn't have to think too hard. On the 3rd day, it went sideways fast. Rafe took one bite of something that wasn't supposed to be a problem, then his face changed like a switch got flipped. He grabbed the edge of the table and said, "Something's wrong, and I need air right now." And I was already hauling him up before he finished. We got him outside, his breathing got tight, and Tobin snapped, "Do not be a hero, we're getting help," as I waved down a cab like my arm could command traffic. It wasn't dramatic once the cab doors shut. It was procedural and exhausting. The hospital kept Rafe for observation. Tobin's client emergency turned real, and by the time Jed and I got back to the hotel, the trip felt finished. Jed offered to stay one more night and check on Rafe in the morning, but I moved my flight up and headed home with a dumb little surprise plan to smooth my own nerves. I grabbed coffee and those powdered sugar beignets Delaney liked to post about, picked up a bottle of rye she always claimed she loved, and pulled into our garage in the early evening thinking I'd step up behind her and get that easy smile. Instead, I heard her voice upstairs, sharp and clean like she didn't care who heard. I climbed halfway up the stairs with the paper bag in one hand and the bottle in the other, and I froze when she said, "This marriage is a collar, and I'm done pretending it's anything else." She paused like she was listening, then added, "Vance is access, that's it. And his father brings me closer to the board whether he knows it yet or not." The man on the other end didn't sound familiar, but his laugh slid through her words like a smirk. Delaney kept going, calm and bored, and that was the part that burned the worst. I stood there waiting for the joke, the backtrack, anything that would make it less ugly, and nothing came. I backed down without making a sound, walked out, and drove until I ended up in the long-term lot at the airport, like it was the only place that made sense. I slept in my car with my suit jacket bunched up as a blanket, and I stared at the roof until my eyes went dry. Around midnight, a night guard tapped my window. His name tag said Harlan Hal Dorsey, and he asked, "Are you all right, son, or do you need somebody to call?" I swallowed hard and said, "My dog died, and I couldn't go home yet." And he nodded like he believed me. He left a bottle of water on my hood and said, "Whatever it is, don't make decisions in the dark." And when he walked off, I twisted the cap and drank. I finished the water and sat there until the sky turned gray over the airport lot. When my phone buzzed a low battery warning, I drove out and headed home. I showered, shaved, dressed for work, and walked in through the front door like I'd spent the night in my own bed. Delaney met me in the hallway and hugged me hard, but it felt timed, like she'd rehearsed it. "I missed you, and I hate when you're gone," she said, pressing her cheek to mine. She pulled back, smiled, and held my face in her hands, checking me like I was something she owned and needed to keep polished. "New Orleans treated us fine," I said, letting her lead because I needed time. She asked about the food, about Tobin's work drama, and whether Jed was still the quiet one, then laughed like she was collecting proof. When I paused to pour coffee, she jumped in with, "You look exhausted, so we're doing something nice this weekend." Like silence was a threat. I played along because if I cracked, I'd blow the whole house up in one breath. She filled every gap with a compliment, a plan, or a joke, and it kept her in control. "You've been carrying so much," she said, rubbing my shoulder, and I answered, "Yeah, work's been a lot," even though my jaw felt tight. Her eyes stayed on me, steady and measuring, like she was waiting for me to slip. That night she curled into me like nothing had changed, warm and heavy against my side. I stared at the ceiling and felt detached, like my body belonged to somebody else. One decision landed hard and clean in my chest. I wasn't going to beg for truth from a woman who could call our marriage a collar with that kind of calm. Over the next couple days, I watched patterns instead of promises. I tracked when she left, when she took calls, and when her smile was real versus staged. I treated my own life like an audit, because that's what I knew. Her calendar stayed packed with investor meetings, usually day trips and sometimes overnight, and she always said Savannah without blinking. She came home with stories and no paperwork, and the stories never had details you could check. I called Nadine Ray, a mediator I'd known since college who moved through the same charity and boardroom circles as my mother, and kept it plain. "I might need a steady head soon, and a referral if this turns legal," I told her. Nadine didn't ask for gossip, and she didn't soften it either. "Document what you can and then decide what you want," she said, like a rule. After that, I texted Jed, and only Jed. "I might need you as a witness later." And he wrote back, "Say the word and I'll be there." Meanwhile, my father ramped up a Founders Week dinner tied to a downtown project, and the family office buzzed with calls. One of the people suddenly orbiting those calls was Kiernan Pike, an outside governance consultant who showed up whenever Clifton wanted a delicate decision pushed through cleanly. Delaney had been hinting for months that she'd be helping Clifton more directly, and I used to hear ambition in it. Now it sounded like a plan with a finish line. I started backing up household records, bank statements, shared bills, the prenuptial paperwork, old emails, the same way I would before a compliance review. Delaney noticed I was quieter and called it stress, offering massages, booking a table at my favorite place, and telling my mother, "Vance works so hard I worry about him." I smiled, kept my voice even, watched her eyes track me across the room, and slid the copied files into my office safe. I shut my office safe and turned the dial twice, slow and deliberate, like the click could keep my life from spilling out. Delaney's voice floated from the kitchen, light and upbeat, asking if I wanted eggs, and I answered like nothing in me had changed. My face stayed calm, my hands stayed steady, and that fake normal was the first tool I trusted. On a Thursday morning, I told her I had a meeting downtown and grabbed my keys before she could attach herself to the plan. She leaned against the counter in a robe, watching me like she was reading my posture. "Do you want me to meet you later, or are you slammed all day?" she asked, sweet and casual. I gave her a small smile and said, "I'll be slammed, but I'll call you when I can," then walked out before she could add a notary to the sentence. I drove to a bank branch we didn't normally use, the kind of place with unfamiliar faces and no gossip pipeline. I didn't want some teller calling Delaney later with, "Funny seeing Vance today," like this was a social town and not a business one. Inside, the air smelled like carpet cleaner and stale coffee, and the woman at the desk spoke in that polite, rehearsed tone people use when they think you're important. "I need the activity on our joint account going back several months," I said, keeping my voice flat. She asked for identification and a reason, and I gave her the kind of answer nobody argues with. "I'm reconciling household records for tax planning," I told her, and she nodded like it was the most normal thing in the world. The account had been leaking money in small bites. Cash withdrawals between about $285 and $515, spaced out just enough to look harmless, like somebody was skimming without wanting to trigger alarms. Added up, it came to roughly $31,600 over about 7 months. The timing lined up clean with Delaney's Savannah Investor Days, but the rest of the trail didn't. No hotel charges, no restaurants, no gas receipts. Nothing that looked like business, just cash out and silence after. The ATM locations didn't match Savannah either. They clustered near Littleton, Delaney's hometown, plus a couple pulls around Mount Pleasant like somebody was grabbing cash close to Charleston and then again out of town. I stared at the printed pages and felt my jaw tighten, not from shock but from the math. This wasn't a mistake, this was a pattern. I didn't confront her, and I didn't even breathe different around her. I saved screenshots, printed statements, and filed them the same way I would if somebody was stealing from one of our entities. That night, while Delaney showered, I moved through the house, quiet and controlled, listening to water hit tile like a metronome. In the spare closet, behind a stack of folded linens, she'd tossed an old gym bag like it was dead weight. I slid it out and checked the side pocket, and my fingers hit plastic. A cheap burner phone sat there with no case, no photos, no apps. Just the kind of thing you bought with cash and pretended didn't exist. The passcode was a date, and it wasn't ours. I didn't guess a dozen times like an amateur. I tried her birthday because liars always think their own story is the center, and the screen unlocked. One contact was saved as M. The messages weren't romantic in any soft way. They were transactional with tiny sprinkles of affection like tipping a waiter to keep him friendly. "We are almost there, so stay steady," one text said. Another read, "That advisory board seat is close and you know it." Then, "Once Clifton signs off, we move fast." The name wasn't hidden in the thread. It was Merrick Voss, a luxury realtor, and the tone said they weren't new to each other. It read like two people who'd been running the same hustle for years and just raised the stakes. I photographed everything, sent copies to a drive in my office safe, and emailed a small batch to Nadine in case my laptop mysteriously broke. 2 days later, I got punched again, quieter but deeper. Merrick's name showed up in an email chain tied to my father's company, circling one of our properties as a broker option for a buyer. Delaney hadn't picked a random guy. She'd picked someone who could touch my family's world. That night, I climbed into bed beside her, let the room go dark, and listened to her breathe while my hand closed around my phone under the sheet. I kept my phone in my fist until Delaney's breathing settled into that deep, careless rhythm. My thumb hovered over the screen like it wanted to burn a hole through it, but I didn't call anyone from bed. I waited for daylight because I wasn't going to make a wild move while she lay there pretending we were normal. In the morning, I drove to work like I always did, steady hands on the wheel and a flat face. From my office, I called Nadine Ray again, and this time I didn't dance around it. "I'm ready for that referral," I said, discreet and not impressed by my last name. Nadine didn't ask for a story. "I'll text you a couple names," she said. "Pick the one you trust." One of them was Laurel Sutter. By Monday, I was sitting across from Laurel Sutter in a plain office building that didn't scream family attorney. The lobby had beige walls, cheap art, and a receptionist who didn't look up until I said my name, which was exactly what I wanted. Laurel's office smelled like black coffee and printer paper, and she looked like a woman who lived on facts and didn't waste mercy on people who hadn't earned it. I laid out the basics without dressing it up. What I heard, what I found, what the money showed, and how it all pointed in one direction. Then I slid the burner phone photos across her desk and watched her eyes move, quick and sharp. She didn't gasp and she didn't comfort me. She just nodded once and said, "Good. You brought proof, not feelings." Laurel told me what I could do clean and what I shouldn't touch at all. She had me start a separate account, but in a way that was explainable on paper, not some dramatic cash grab. "Redirect your salary portion and set aside reserves tied to your role," she said, tapping her pen like she was setting a boundary. "If she asks, you say it's risk management because it is." She had me freeze my credit and pull a full report, and that's where I saw two inquiries I didn't recognize. They were small, but they were recent, and they weren't mine. Laurel leaned back and said, "That's not nothing, Vance, so lock everything down like you're preparing for a hurricane." I asked, "What if she already started something?" And Laurel didn't blink. "Then we make sure she cannot finish it," she said. Quietly, I adjusted permissions on shared financial tools at home and at the family office where it touched our household setup. I wasn't taking money, and I wasn't breaking rules. I was tightening process. Two-step approvals, alerts to my phone, limits that made sense on paper, and a trail that would look responsible to anyone with a brain. If Delaney complained, I could tell her it was standard risk control, and I could say it with a straight face. At home, I stayed polite on purpose. I washed dishes, asked about her day, and kissed her cheek like I still believed in it, because I needed her calm and predictable. She tested me with little pauses, watching for anger, and I gave her nothing but steady. The routine kept her from claiming I flipped overnight, and it kept me from doing something stupid. Then I started dropping small triggers, just enough to make the ground shake under her without showing my hand. I left an open browser tab about South Carolina Asset Division on my laptop and let her, accidentally, see it when she walked behind me. I slid a printed article about protecting family wealth and marriage into my work bag where it would peek out. At dinner, I said, casual as breathing, "Dad's reviewing board governance after the last project, so everybody's tightening access." And Delaney's fork paused half an inch too long. She reacted like a person hearing thunder in the distance. At first, she turned up the charm, bringing me surprise lunches and leaving notes that said things like, "I'm proud of you, and I know you carry a lot." Her voice went soft in that way she used when she wanted me to feel like the strong one. When the love bombing didn't settle me, she shifted to control, walking into rooms when I was on calls and asking, "Who are you texting lately because you seem distracted?" She tried to take my phone with a smile and said, "Let me see the picture you're looking at," like it was playful. I went quiet on purpose. Fewer texts, slower responses, short answers that weren't mean but weren't warm either. And it made her restless because she couldn't grab anything solid. One evening, I left a fake internal memo on the printer about an internal audit on personal reimbursements tied to executive families, vague enough to be believable and sharp enough to sting. The next morning, Delaney was suddenly eager to help my mother with charity planning, and she asked, bright-eyed, "Can I attend your father's Founders Week dinner as more than just your wife?" I nodded like it was normal, walked into my office, and wrote the dinner date on a legal pad. The calmer I acted, the harder she leaned into the performance of normal. She turned the perfect wife routine up to a higher volume. She made my lunch like it was a movie scene, wrapping sandwiches tight and adding a note with little hearts like we were teenagers. She posted couple photos like she was building an alibi in public, smiling too big and tagging locations like proof mattered more than truth. When I didn't react the way she wanted, she doubled down, and it got obvious fast. At the same time, she got jumpy in a way she couldn't hide. If I stepped outside to take a call, she opened the back door to check on me, pretending she needed fresh air. If my phone buzzed on the counter, her eyes flicked to it before mine did, and then she'd start talking louder like she could cover the sound. "I was thinking we should have people over soon," she'd say, watching my screen light up, "because everybody's been asking about us." One afternoon, I was in a meeting at the family office, and I didn't answer a call because my father was in the room and the numbers mattered. When I checked later, my phone showed she'd rung me 23 times in under an hour. I stepped into the hall and called back, and she picked up on the first ring like she'd been holding the phone. "Are you okay, Vance? Because you are not answering and I'm worried," she said, breathing hard. Then she slid in the real question. "Did something happen with your dad? Because you sound different lately." After that, she started pushing big fixes like she was trying to reset a device before the data got pulled. She brought up marriage counseling, a weekend at a vineyard in Virginia, and even starting fresh somewhere new, like a move could erase what she'd done. "We could do a clean restart, and it would be good for us," she said at dinner, reaching across the table like she owned my hand. I pulled my hand back to grab my glass and answered, "We can talk about options," because giving her nothing drove her crazier than fighting. Then came the first ugly twist, and she didn't even ease into it. She started hinting at a baby, sudden and urgent, timed exactly when my little triggers were landing. We'd talked about kids before in a normal way, but this wasn't that, and her eyes stayed too sharp. "Maybe this is the moment we stop overthinking and just build something real," she said, like she was selling me a package deal. 2 days later, I walked into the bathroom and saw a pregnancy test sitting on the counter like it had grown there. Delaney appeared in the doorway half a second later, acting surprised at her own setup. "Oh my gosh, I didn't even mean to leave that out," she said, but she watched my face more than she watched the stick. I kept my voice calm and said, "We'll do it right, and we'll get a doctor appointment for confirmation." Her smile twitched, and it didn't reach her eyes. That week, Jed called me, and his tone was heavier than usual. "I have something I should have said months ago," he told me, and I didn't interrupt because I could hear the guilt in his breathing. He said he'd seen Delaney at a bar near a bank in Mount Pleasant, sitting in a booth with a man he recognized from real estate ads. I told myself it could be nothing, but it didn't look like nothing, he said, and I answered, "I needed you to tell me now, so keep talking." He gave me the time window and the place, and I wrote it down. Tobin did what Tobin always did when chaos showed up, even from a distance. He ran a light background sweep, nothing illegal, just public breadcrumbs that people left out like crumbs on purpose. He texted me, "Merrick keeps popping up around her old Littleton circle, and it looks like he never really left her life." And I felt my jaw tighten because it fit too clean. I tracked the cash withdrawals too, and they kept coming. Only now they were bolder. Larger amounts, closer together. Like panic was making her greedy and greed was making her sloppy. Delaney started tripping over her own stories, saying, "Savannah investor dinner," while a photo-tagged event showed her in Littleton, and calling something a client meeting that lined up with an open house Merrick was promoting. I fed her one more fake trail on purpose. At my parents' place, within Delaney's hearing range, I told my father, "We might be restructuring how spouses interact with company governance. Less access and more boundaries after the last project." Clifton raised an eyebrow, saw my face, and said, "That would be smart, and we'll discuss it," like he'd been expecting it. That night, Delaney went quiet in a way that felt dangerous, kissed me goodnight like she was sealing an envelope, and I waited until she settled into sleep before I got up and locked the new printed statements into my office safe. Founders Week arrived and took over my parents' calendar. It turned into a parade of dinners, site visits, handshakes, and polite smiles that hid sharp elbows. Delaney moved through it like she owned the place, touching my mother's arm at the perfect moments and laughing at my father's jokes like she'd written them. She made herself look inevitable, and I watched it all with the same blank face I'd been practicing for weeks. At a daytime site walk for one of Clifton's downtown projects, I saw Merrick Voss in person for the first time. He wasn't a name in a thread anymore, and he wasn't just a realtor headshot on a screen. He stood there in loafers and a fitted blazer, smiling like he belonged in my father's orbit. Clifton clapped him on the shoulder and said, "Merrick knows the market, and he's been helpful on a few angles." Like that settled it. Delaney's face didn't flinch, not even a blink too long. Merrick's eyes flicked to her and back like they had practiced being strangers in a mirror. My stomach dropped hard enough to make my hands feel cold, but my voice stayed steady because I refused to give either of them a reaction to feed on. I nodded once and said, "Good to meet you, Merrick. I've heard your name around." And Merrick answered, "Likewise, Vance. I've heard nothing but great things," with that smooth, sales bro confidence. Later that afternoon, Nadine sent me a screenshot from a friend of a friend's story. It showed Delaney and Merrick at a private charity after-party months earlier, close enough that there was no innocent excuse left. Same posture, same little lean-in like they shared air, same lie dressed up in good lighting. Nadine's message was short and sharp. "This is not new, and you are not imagining it." I didn't respond with feelings because I didn't have room for them, so I typed, "Save it and forward the original," and she did. That night, while Delaney slept, I searched her car because the first phone had taught me she liked backups. I wasn't proud of it, but I also wasn't going to be the man who waited politely while somebody cleaned out his life. I popped the trunk, lifted the panel, and opened the spare tire compartment. Wrapped in a scarf, I found a second burner phone. The second phone was worse than the first, because it wasn't flirting and vague promises. It was planning, ugly and practical, with talk of a bridge loan and a fake gift structure that made my skin crawl. There were notes about getting my signature by using a notary during a showing, like I was some distracted husband who could be guided into signing away his own life. There were also messages with Kiernan Pike, short and mean, about keeping Vance calm and timing the board vote, and they talked about me like I was furniture that needed moving. I didn't sit there and spiral. I photographed everything, put the phone back exactly where it was, and drove straight to Laurel the next morning with my jaw clenched the whole way. Laurel didn't yell or dramatize it when I slid the new images across her desk. She scanned them and said, "Now we build the cage before she tries to fly." And she started lining up protections, bank alerts, signature controls, and a plan that kept me inside the rules while cutting off Delaney's angles. Then she suggested a controlled sting, and her voice stayed calm when she said, "If she tries the bridge loan route, we make it light up like a fire alarm." We set it so any attempt to move money or secure anything under my name triggered immediate holds and notifications. After that, I called Jed and Tobin and gave them the truth in broad strokes. No drama and no begging. Jed said, "If Laurel needs a statement, I will sign whatever is accurate." And Tobin said, "If she tries to paint you as unstable, I'll keep your public footprint clean and factual." By the time I left Laurel's office, the last piece was simple and heavy at the same time. I decided I'd confront Delaney at home first, face to face, with direct questions and no yelling, because I wanted her words again. I sat in my car outside the building, typed the questions into my notes app until my thumbs cramped, kept them simple the way Laurel told me to, then started the engine and drove home with my face locked and blank. That Saturday, I cooked dinner like it was any other weekend, like we were still the couple people liked to envy. Nothing fancy, just the kind of meal Delaney always claimed made her feel safe, the kind she'd brag about to my mother like she was collecting points. I put a candle on the table, set clean plates, and kept the kitchen spotless, because I wanted the room to look calm even if she wasn't. The food smelled good, and it made me furious that my hands could still do normal while my marriage was rotting in real time. Delaney came in dressed like she was going somewhere after. Her hair was done, her lipstick was perfect, and she had on shoes you didn't wear if you planned to stay home. That told me she expected either a fight or an escape route, and the fact she planned for both made my chest feel tight. She smiled anyway, wide and bright, the kind of smile that could sell condos and convince strangers she was the victim of anything. "This looks amazing, baby," she said, kissing my cheek like we were posing for a picture. I nodded and said, "Sit down and eat while it's hot," keeping my voice even and my eyes on the plates instead of her face. We ate, and she talked like she owned the future. She leaned into her next steps with my father, careful words wrapped in fake care. "Clifton has so much on his plate, and I could support governance in a real way," she said, cutting her food with slow confidence. "I could ease his load, and you know he trusts me." I nodded and let her talk because I wanted her comfortable. The candle flickered and the air felt thick. She kept going, dropping phrases like structure and access and committee rhythm, and I watched how natural it was for her to speak about my family like it was a ladder. When she lifted her glass for a toast, I didn't reach for mine. I kept my voice calm and asked, "Do you remember what you called our marriage on the phone?" I didn't raise my tone, and I didn't accuse because I didn't need heat to burn her. Her eyes tightened for half a second. Then she tried the casual act like I was confused. "What are you talking about, Vance? Because you sound crazy right now," she said, and she gave a small laugh that didn't match her face. I stared at her and said, "You called it a collar," and I watched the word land. Silence thickened between us, and her posture shifted like she'd been caught mid-step. She tried to laugh it off again, then flipped fast into excuses. "That was stress and work and people twisting things, and you know I would never mean it like that," she said, leaning forward like closeness could control me. I slid my phone across the table, not showing everything, just enough to make her stomach drop. I kept my voice flat and asked, "And Merrick Voss, how long has that been going on?" The name landed hard, and her expression slipped for the first time. She didn't cry at first. She got angry, then scared, then angry again, like she was cycling through options. "How did you get your hands on private things, because that is disgusting," she snapped, and her fingers tightened around her fork like it was a weapon. You had no right to go through my stuff, and you're acting controlling. I didn't argue about rights. I said, answer the question. And my voice stayed calm because calm made it harder for her to paint me as unstable. When she realized denial wasn't working, she reached for the biggest lever she had. We can fix this because I'm pregnant, she said fast, and then she tried to make it soft. She put a hand on her stomach, her eyes went glossy, and her voice turned sweet like syrup. This is our chance to be real, and I don't want to lose you. I didn't bite. I looked at her and said, we'll verify it on Monday with a doctor appointment, and Laurel already knows. The way her face fell told me exactly what it was, and it wasn't joy. It was strategy failing in real time. She switched straight into threats because that was her last language. I will tell your parents you've been controlling and cruel, and Charleston will eat you alive, she said, pushing her chair back a little, testing the exit. People will believe me, and you know they will. I met her eyes and said, I already heard what you really think of me, and I'm done playing along. Then I ended it clean. The divorce filing is in motion and the accounts are protected, I said, and I kept my hands on the table so she could see I wasn't shaking. Delaney stood up so hard her chair scraped the floor, loud and ugly against the tile. She looked at me like she couldn't stand being seen without control. Then she turned and walked out of the room. Delaney's heels clicked down the hall, then the front door shut hard enough to rattle the glass in the cabinet. I stayed at the table with the candle still burning, staring at the empty chair like it had teeth. I didn't chase her, and I didn't send a paragraph text, because chasing was what she expected. I took my phone, stepped into my office, and sent Laurel one line. I'm ready to move. I didn't serve her at home because Laurel warned me that turns into chaos and accusations that never die in a small town. Instead, Delaney got served in a corporate lobby during what she thought was a Savannah investor meeting. I wasn't there, and I didn't want to be there, because watching her get cornered would have fed the wrong part of me. Laurel called me after it happened and said, she stepped out of the elevator, saw the papers, went pale, then snapped into a polite smile like she could charm the process server into disappearing. The bank holds hit fast, not dramatic but firm. Accounts locked, transfers blocked, signature authority tightened, and every guardrail we set up did exactly what it was supposed to do. Delaney called me from a parking lot with her voice shaking, trying to sound confused instead of caught. Something is wrong with the bank, and they are treating me like a criminal, she said, and I answered, ask your lawyer, because I'm not explaining basic consequences to you. Kiernan Pike tried to reach me next like this was a business hiccup he could smooth over. He left a voicemail that sounded practiced, all friendly pressure and fake concern. Tobin listened to it and texted me, that guy sounds like he's done this before, so do not give him anything to twist. Laurel's instruction matched his, and she said, do not engage and do not be baited into side conversations. I sat my parents down in the family office and laid everything out like a report, because emotions weren't going to protect us. I showed the money trail, the burner phones, the messages, the bridge loan plan, and the call where she named our marriage like a tool. Clifton didn't yell, and that was worse than yelling, because his silence meant disappointment had gone bone deep. Eileen cried, wiped her face, and asked Laurel, what steps do we take to keep her away from anything governance-related? Because I will not have her near this family again. Within days, Delaney tried to turn the pregnancy claim into something legal, like paperwork could make it real. Laurel requested documentation, and Delaney's side dragged their feet, which told me everything before the records even showed up. When the records came back, the timeline didn't match, and Laurel's voice stayed flat when she said, this is staged, and we can prove it. Later, we found proof she'd bought test supplies and set up photos like a little production. And it wasn't just a lie, it was a pattern. Merrick sent a letter through his attorney trying to paint the bridge loan messages as jokes, like grown adults plan fraud for laughs. Laurel answered once, cold and short, and attached screenshots that made jokes look stupid. After that, their tone shifted from confident to careful, and I noticed the silence where swagger used to be. Charleston being Charleston, rumors started moving faster than facts. Delaney tried to get ahead of it with carefully placed sympathy, hinting I was emotionally distant and punishing her, like she was some misunderstood wife in a sad story. Tobin helped me keep my response minimal and factual, because public fighting was exactly what she wanted. My dignity became a strategy, not a mood. The cleanest payback came from business, not gossip. Merrick lost a major listing tied to Clifton's project once Clifton realized he'd been played, and my father cut him off without raising his voice. Delaney moved out within a week, not to some glamorous landing spot, but to a furnished rental in North Charleston. Nadine heard it through Delaney's circle and sent me the address with a note that said, "Not for revenge, for paperwork." And I printed it, clipped it to my file, and walked it straight into Laurel's office. Laurel took the address from my hand, slid it into my file, and said, "Good, we keep this clean." I nodded and walked out into the heat. The emergency part wrapped in a little under 8 weeks after that, with temporary orders, locked accounts, and Delaney's story collapsing once the documents hit the table. Laurel kept it tight, and Delaney couldn't stop contradicting herself when she tried to talk her way out of paper trails. The final decree came a few months later. I didn't win big, I just stopped losing, and that was enough. I didn't stay in the house either because too many rooms felt borrowed. I rented a smaller place near the water, with a porch where I could drink coffee without watching someone's face for motives. Clifton took it personally that he'd almost pulled Delaney into the inner circle. He didn't give speeches, and he didn't beg forgiveness because that wasn't him. One Sunday afternoon he came by, sat with me on the porch, and stared out at the marsh like he was reading it. After a long stretch, he said, "I should have seen what she was doing." And I answered, "You trusted her because she trained you to." He stayed another hour without saying much, and that was his apology. Eileen shifted from heartbreak to protection mode fast. She made calls, moved chairs, and closed doors without drama, and charity circles got the message that Delaney was no longer family. Delaney tried to contact me after the decree, emails first and then letters, each one written like a pitch. In one, she said she never meant it the way it sounded, like words didn't count when they were ugly. Laurel told me, "Do not respond, not even to correct her." So I dropped the envelope into a drawer and left it there. Merrick and Delaney didn't last long once money and status weren't on the table. I knew because Laurel forwarded a later filing tied to a dispute between them, and Nadine's mutuals watched the split happen. The fake pregnancy did more damage to how people saw her than anything else. Cheating and scheming were bad enough, but using a child as leverage was something even her fans couldn't defend. Jed stayed steady through all of it. He met me for lunch, let me talk in plain language, and said, "You are not crazy for feeling humiliated. You're just awake now." Tobin helped me keep my dignity in a town that feeds on stories, and Rafe told me, "If I ever see her again, I'm walking the other way, no exceptions." Years passed. By the time I was 57, what stuck with me wasn't her face at dinner or papers in a lobby. It was the airport lot, Hal Dorsey's hand on my window, and that quiet warning about not making decisions in the dark. So one morning with the sun up, I locked my front door and walked down to the water again. Before you go, tell me this in the comments. Would you build your case quietly the way I did? Or confront them the moment you realized your partner saw you as access instead of family?